Hello, dear students. How are you? Welcome to our 16th poetry course for today, which is going to be about the lyric. Okay, so what's the lyric? Actually, the lyric is the first type of poetry that we will study after we have finished the objective types of poetry. So, the lyric is a subjective type of poem. So from now on, we are going to study subjective types of poetry. Lyrical poetry actually is defined by being the kind of poetry that expresses personal emotions or thoughts of the speaker, just like the songs of today. And just like songs, the lyric poems always have a musical quality or a specific melody which makes it easy for you to sing along with. The term lyric can be attributed to Greek origins, and specifically, it is derived from the word lyre, which refers to the instrument in that era that accompanied the reading of the lyric poem. So, lyre is a kind of musical instrument that was used in singing these poems, and that's why today we know it as the lyric. Because in the Greek times, poetry was one of two things, either the lyric or what we call the milik, which means that we have a single voice, and this voice sings to the accompaniment of a lyre, or the choric, which was intended for collective singing to the accompaniment again of musical instrument, supplemented probably by a dance. So, according to its Greek origin, it has two characteristics according to this kind of description. It is an expression of a single emotion, and number two, it's a musical composition. I think you can read more if you go to page 104 about the origin of the lyric. For most part, lyrics are short and written by using first person point of view. That is, it's very common for you to encounter pronouns like I, my, mine, etc. Another point which distinguishes the lyric is that there is always some specific mood or emotion being expressed. And this is quite true. If you read many examples of lyric, I'm sure you will come to the conclusion that it is an expression of a certain mood or emotion. Basically, topics like love and death are very popular in lyrics because they actually have in them intense emotional experiences. Lyrics are well known for being very brief, very emotionally tense, and musical in nature. And actually, as we shall see in the coming lectures, there are many types that we will study under the expression of lyric. Um, it's nice to have this metaphor in mind. The lyric is an umbrella under which you can include many other things. So for most parts of the lyric, actually, they deal with topics related to single emotions or feelings. We also notice that lyrics appeal more to the heart than to the mind. Or let me put it this way. I would say that the lyric appeals to the intellect but through the heart. Lyrical poetry is also associated with singing, you know. Most of the lyrics are sung. And today, if you Google the word lyric, you might be given results which are results for songs, not for poems, because lyrical poetry is often sung. All right. So if you go to page 105, you will notice that lyrics are basically about emotions and not about thoughts. So when a poet chooses the lyric form, the poet doesn't intend to make any long flight. He just wishes to convey his impression, that is, swiftly, memorably, and most importantly, musically. For example, the famous American poet Edgar Allan Poe wrote several famous lyrics. He once declared that a long lyric was not possible. You know why? Because lyrics express emotions, and emotions show excitement. So, that degree of excitement, which would entitle a poem to be called a lyric, cannot be sustained through a composition of great length. Okay? Therefore, and this is very important, I want you to notice this. The lyric is usually understood to cover the song, the ode, the sonnet, and such poems as in the definition given by Belgrave in the preference to his golden treasury, when he says, a turn on some single thought, feeling, or situation. And of course, I don't need to remind you that the lyric is a subjective poem, all right? And it expresses the poet's emotions, and therefore it cannot help being intensely personal. So as you can see, the lyric is associated with music, and music here is not only in the musical instruments. Actually, a music should be in the words. All right. The lyrics are actually unrivaled for their word music or verbal melody. And you still remember sound devices. The poet often uses vowels and consonants artistically to compose a music uh, of 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 this kind of vowels or consonants. And often the singer might seek the aid of a musical instrument. But should music be just in the instrument, or should the words themselves be musical? Actually, we have to keep in mind that if we are in the realm of poetry, a music should exist in the words themselves. And therefore, music should become independent of the lyre. I want to refer you to this stanza written by Tennyson. And I want you to feel the music that we find in the vowels and the consonants. Page 105. Please, if you want to see it, it's page 105. Tennyson says, "O hark, O hear, how thin and clear, and thinner, clearer, farther going. Oh, sweet and far from cliff and scar, the horns of Elfland faintly blowing." Okay, look at the use of the vowels in O, hark, or hear. Notice the use of the consonant H, hark, hear, how. And then I want you to notice the internal rhyme in hear and clear. In line 2, Notice the presence of thinner, clearer, farther going, the internal rhyme. Also, you have far and scar in line 3. This is an excellent example of internal rhyme. In addition to that, notice the use of alliteration, consonant alliteration in sweet and scar. The fourth line, the horns of Elfland faintly blowing. Notice Elfland and faintly. Alliteration of sounds within words. Indeed, there is sufficient music in the words themselves. This is a proof that the lyric has become independent of the lyre. So whether there is the musical instrument, which is the lyre, or the lyric itself, there should be music. All right? This is the nature of the lyric. Now, what is the structure of the lyric? What kind of structure does the lyric possess? Actually, dear students, when I teach the lyric, I often remember the structure of a well-made paragraph. When we study writing, teachers often tell us that a good paragraph includes introduction, body, and conclusion. Well, the poem is not a paragraph, but it has a structure similar to that of the paragraph. I want you to go to page 106 and to see that the lyric is divided into three distinct parts, and they correspond to the three moods through which the poet passes when inspired by some emotion. So no one can write a lyric without inspiration. I want you to feel it, that the lyric is actually a moment of excitement that was put on paper. You are excited, so you pick your pen and you start writing. So the first part is the introduction. And the introduction generally consists of the first few lines or at most of the first stanza. And in this part, the emotion is stated. And what kind of emotion? It's the emotion which has set the poet's imagination working. Some people call it the motive, if you like, the motive that motivates the writer to write. It's the cause of movement, or what I mean by movement is emotional movement. Actually, the introduction is figuratively, let me say, it sets the ball rolling. All right. The second part is the body. And the body forms the bulk of the poem, the largest portion of the poem. And it consists of the thoughts suggested by the emotion. By the time the poet reaches this part of the poem, the poem well advanced in intensity and what shall I say, and therefore the expression reaches its highest point of eloquence or passion, the best the best moment of self-expression or passion or emotion, if you like. So exactly like we have a paragraph, the body is the largest part. It's exactly like the trunk of the human body. You have the head, you have the body, and you have the feet. Yes, so the head is the introduction, the body is the body, and then the conclusion. Now, I have to tell you that the conclusion is optional. The poet can choose to write a conclusion or to have an open ending, that is, to finish his poem when he reaches the body of the poem. So the third and the final part, as I said, should be as short as the first one, and it usually comprises the last stanza, and it also marks the poet's return to his initial mood, which is the mood of reason, the mood of logic, if you want to call it. For by this time, the emotion which had stirred his mind and heart has found release in suitable words and images. Different from the first two parts, the conclusion is often intellectual in nature, embodying often a judgment, a pointed summary, and ending with a parting smile or sigh. So, in the conclusion, the poet can advise the readers, the poet can give them a piece of wisdom, or can teach them a lesson, or can just sum up what he said earlier. It is his choice, or he can leave it open. To sum up, the lyric poem has a number of characteristics that you find if you open page 107. Yes, the first characteristic is that the lyric is short. It's short because it deals with a single emotion. It is also musical, where the music, of course, being an important element in its effect. Many lyrics are sung, therefore, they should be musical, subjective, because it expresses the varying moods of the author. So he most of the time uses I, my, mine, myself. Yes. Um, Finally, it's a well knit poem because it has a definite structure. But however, I want you to notice that the division into three parts should not be pressed too far. Some lyrics may not reach an intellectual conclusion at all. A poet's emotion is a law unto itself and pursues a course no critic can prescribe or analyze. So it's up to the poet to reach a conclusion or not to reach a conclusion. But whether he reaches a conclusion or not, the lyric remains as a form of poetry which we can describe as well knit, or if you like, well built structure. All right. Nothing can be clear without an example. So, our example for today is going to be by the great romantic poet Lord Byron. We will study his poem When We Two Parted. Not a very optimistic topic, as you can see. When We Two Parted, page 108. Page 108, When We Two Parted. Okay, let us have a look. The poem actually recalls the end of a previous relationship that the narrator, who seems to be Byron himself, it's about a relationship that our narrator still feels sad and regretful about. The relationship was secret, and ever since the breakup, he has been unable to outwardly express his sadness. He actually pines in silence. He suffers in silence. Byron also feels that his beloved lady was untrue to him, and he is still deeply hurt even long after the breakup occurred. Okay, so let us go to the poem. Let us read it. Page 108. When We Two Parted by Lord Byron. When we two parted in silence and tears, half broken hearted, to sever for years, pale grew thy cheek and cold, colder thy kiss, truly that hour foretold sorrow to this. The dew of the morning sank chill on my brow. It felt like the warning of what I feel now. Thy vows are all broken, and light is thy fame. I hear thy name spoken, and share in its shame. They name thee before me, a knell in mine ear. A shudder comes over me. Why wert thou so dear? They knew not I knew thee, who knew thee too well. Long, long shall I rue thee, too deeply to tell. In secret we met, in silence I grieve, that thy heart could forget, thy spirit deceive. If I should meet thee again, after long years, how should I regret thee? With silence and tears. What an unfortunate guy. As you can feel the tone, I'm sure you feel the tone. The poet is deeply bitter about the breakup, believing that he will continue to rue, that is, to regret this relationship for a long, long time. And obviously, he blames his lover's fault that the relation ended. And that's why he says, thy heart could forget, thy spirit deceive. But we are unable to tell what objectively happened because we have the narrator's side of the story. We don't have the lady's side of the story. But of course, this doesn't make the poem any less honest. It is essentially about the poet's feelings about the breakup, not really about the breakup itself. He's interested in expressing his emotions. And isn't this, after all, what the lyric is all about? Yes, it is. The poem is also very secretive, if you have noticed. Byron never mentions the name of the beloved lady. He simply calls her thee. He doesn't use a specific name, he doesn't give any details. And obviously, none of his friends knew about the relationship. They knew not, I knew thee. And also, he says in secret. I think, you have to use these words for analysis. This secrecy in the relationship has made it hard for him to share his feelings. When nobody knows about your feelings, it's difficult to share them. As he is also ashamed of the breakup and his unhappiness. He feels guilty. He says he knew her too well. He hasn't forgiven himself or his lover. I feel that he feels sort of fooled in the relationship, or he takes himself to be easily betrayed. I don't know. These are just possibilities. In the second stanza, Byron sets the poem in the morning of some day, long ago, and explains that the dew dampened his head. Actually, we have no information about the setting. We don't know where the poem took place. It is simply a place that has a dew. It's simply the morning, but no more information is given. When he writes, he says, it felt like the warning. So, of what I feel now, he changes the tense of the verb into from felt into feel, so that we have a sense of how the emotion has continued in time. The poet is wounded, he is bereaved, so he seems to have a continuous feeling of pain, as we can imagine. And by the end of the poem, when we two parted, Byron looks towards the future, but is unsure of what will happen in the future. The future remains unknown. So he didn't write what will or shall happen, but what should be if another meeting ever takes place. He asks a rhetorical question, which the poet answers with the same words he used to describe the parting years ago with silence and tears. Clearly, he feels that on their next meeting, he will still be feeling the grief of the end of their relationship. So it seems to me that the poet is trying to say that it's going to be a lifetime pain. Okay, let us go back to page 108 and try to have a look at each stanza. We consider the first stanza as an introduction, which is the structure of the lyric. I noticed that the introduction is when we two parted. This is the same as the title. Yani the first line of the poem is the same as the title. So why do you think a poet wouldn't write a title to his poem? I want you to answer my question in your comments and in your questions about the poem or about lyrical poetry in general. Why do you think a poet might leave his poem without a title? There is more than one correct answer. So he says that in the first stanza that he is half broken hearted, and he uses half to say that part of him regrets and the other part of him um, uh, is happy that the relationship is over, but he is still in pain. Also, his beloved lady seems to be indifferent to him because she gave him a cold kiss. And in the second stanza, the writer focuses on visual images and images related to the morning and thermal images related to chill. In the second stanza, the poet actually speaks of his cheeks and speaking of his eyebrows. He felt cold. And then after that, he tells her that she broke all her vows that she gave to him. And he mentions that everybody whispers about her reputation and they don't know that he knows her, but still he feels responsible. He feels that he has a share of the shame that she is in. In stanza number 3 of page 108, as I said, he says, "They name thee before me a knell to mine ear." And here let us stop and explain the beauty of this oral image. He says that people mention her name in front of him and they don't know that he knows her. And when they mention her name, he feels that it's very much like a knell to his ear. A knell is the bell of the church when it tolls for a dead person. The church often has certain bells uh, to be rung actually when there is an occasion like a wedding. So there is the tolling of the bells for a funeral. So her name is like the tolling of bells during the times of a funeral. So when her name is mentioned, he feels like he hears the tolling of bells for a funeral, and therefore a shudder comes over him. He shudders, like when you suddenly feel cold. And he asks himself, "Why wert thou so dear?" That is, why was she so dear to him or valuable? And then he says that long, long shall I rue thee too deeply to tell. The poet doesn't try to deceive himself and say, okay, it takes no time to forget you, go to hell. No, He tries to say that it will take him a long time to forget her. So here we can say that the first stanza is an introduction. The other two stanzas can function as a body, and then the last stanza, the fourth one, can be considered as the conclusion of the poem, in which he says, "In secret we met, in silence I grieve." The poet says that nobody knew about my feelings, so I don't have the right to show my suffering clearly to other people. And he still feels surprised that she forgot him and that she deceived him. He is deeply hurt from the betrayal, but he tries to foretell the future or to predict the future by asking a question: how shall I meet you in the future if this meeting ever happens? And he's very honest with himself. He says, with silence and tears. So notice that in the poem, the poet goes back to his mood. So before we finish our lecture, I want to remind you that I want you to answer two questions. The first one is, why do you think the writer did not bother to find a title to his poem? And number two, what characteristics of the lyric can be found in Lord Byron's When We Two Parted? Thank you very much, guys. This is the end of our lecture. See you next time. And our topic next time is going to be a very beautiful type of poetry, which is the sonnet. Till we meet, thank you and goodbye.